From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast.
Recorded live at the 2019 EcoAg Conference and Trade Show in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
That right there is an aerial photograph of New Forest Farm, and now my thing isn't working. There it is. Okay, there you go. Of New Forest Farm, what you see, all these lines and the direction of those lines has everything to do with the water management pattern. That's my afternoon workshop, and I had a whole day thing on Monday on that, the water management pattern. You can sign up to come on tours of the farm every once in a while, Margaret. So see, you go to newforestfarm.us, and then you can come on a tour sometime. My favorite time of year for doing tours is probably June-ish, middle to late June, because we still have a lot of the spring moisture left over. Hasn't gotten too screaming hot, and we'll have things like chestnuts in full bloom. There's berries all over the place. Part of what I've done also is, if we're going to be planting all these different edible woody crops, there's nobody who has really done the breeding for edible woody crops that survive with my trademarked management technique called STUN, sheer total utter neglect. So you put these things out there, totally neglect them, high competition, no fertility amendments, and the ones that survive, yay, they win. The ones that survive and reproduce really young, they're in the gene pool. The ones that reproduce and give us the most seed and the most fruit, they're more represented in the gene pool than the ones that are pest and disease free. They get selected in addition to that. And it's a long-term process. Then on the water management farm design strategy at Restoration Agriculture Development, we help farmers to transition from annuals to perennials. And think about that. Many of us have grown up with this thing, oh, maybe someday there will be perennials, maybe someday there'll be perennials. Well, you know what? We don't need to wait until perennial grains are a real thing. There's so many perennials out there that we can use as our staple foods, our carbohydrates, proteins, and oils. We don't have to wait. So we help folks to do the transition, do the water management patterns, and plant the trees, etc. I had an interesting childhood. I was not a child of farmers. I did not grow up in a farming background. I grew up in the suburbs. But I grew up in an interesting place right down the road from the Concord Bridge in Massachusetts. Actually, the first person shot at the Concord Bridge was from my hometown. He was my fourth grade teacher's great whoever, grand uncle. He was the drummer boy, Abner Hosmer. This guy lived right down the road, Henry David Thoreau. Many people have heard of him. Not as many people have heard about this guy, except when they're eating French fries. That is a human being who has, to his name, more plant varieties bred than any other human being on the face of the planet. Who knows his name? Luther Burbank, right. And the French fry potato, the standard French fry potato around the world, the big baking potato, the russet potato, he got it. How did he get it? By saving his seeds. And we're told, don't save your seeds because they don't come out true to type, and there'll be a zillion different seeds before you get one good variety. And he's like, yeah, okay, cool, that's how you do it. So you plant a zillion seeds and you pick the one that's magic. That's great. So that's how we do our breeding work with our edible woody crops. Right down the bottom of the hill where I lived, this guy right here, Johnny Chapman, Johnny Appleseed, grew up and born and raised, grabbed all kinds of seeds from the area and took them west with him. And it was also the hometown of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, the first book published in the North American continent by a female was Mary Rowlandson, right in my hometown. She was captured by a band of locals. They took her out through the woods in the wintertime, held her for ransom. They got a whole bunch of money and some food, and they still got shot, and she was ransomed. Grew up in the 70s and 80s. I wasn't quite a baby boomer. I wasn't quite a Generation Xer, so I don't know what the hell I was. All I know is I grew up during the oil embargo years when the Vietnam War was still going on, and the river down at the bottom of the hill would flow red and green and orange and pink and yellow from the dyes from the factories that were going into the river. I thought the world was coming to an end. My first grade class was the last first grade class in my public school system to duck and cover and hide underneath the desks because the nuclear weapons are coming. So that's not a real positive environment for a kid. And I can only imagine what these kids are going through right now when they're doing live shooter drills to go into a lockdown, it messes you up. I was going to use a F word. Messes you up for life. It really does. And so I ran away. I said, we've got to do something about this. I thought that everybody was going to turn around. I was like, yeah, we got to do something about this and actually do something about it instead of wave flags and all that kind of whatever and never really do anything about it and go get a job that you hate and suffer through it and all that. Well, you know what? Times are even worse than they were before. We are in the zombie apocalypse right now. It's a slow apocalypse, but it's accelerating, and we have to turn things around right now for real, no joke. Changing the light bulbs ain't good enough. Ain't good enough. It was during those years, growing up in the 80s, because this was a 1981 or 82 edition of Tree Crops by J. Russell Smith. All of a sudden, I started to get this amazing idea. J. Russell Smith talked about why don't we grow our animal feed, which is our seeds that we feed animals, why don't we grow them on trees and then have grass underneath so we can have this two-story agriculture going on, possibly get more yields, because in his day, about 40 to 50% of all annual crops were fed to livestock, and that was a crime. I mean, we should be feeding people because it was like the Great Depression when this was written and all that. It's worse today. It's like 80% plus of all of our annual grains and legumes go to livestock, which is kind of stupid. So I side with the vegans and vegetarians that say we shouldn't feed these grains to animals, so don't eat the animals, eat the feed directly. I'll take it one step further and say we're not supposed to eat that crap in the first place, because we don't have a crop and a gizzard. Birds eat seeds like that. We eat other things. I also grew up with like Helen and Scott Nearings, Living the Good Life, homesteaders. Helen and John Philbrick, the head of the Biodynamic Association in North America for years and years, the Mother Earth News back when it was actually a cool magazine. All the different Rodale stuff came out. My dad was a big Yule Gibbons fan. He really liked to eat rusty pine cones and stuff like that. And then this little magazine right here that came in newsprint form. How many of you guys remember the newsprint Acres U.S.A? I really missed that because I kept it in the bathroom, and so that would be where I'd read never mind. As an Acres U.S.A. reader is where I ran into this, Eco Farm. And Charles Walters started this whole movement. Once upon a time, this was the only show in town. So people who say, oh, change is so slow, change is so slow, change is lightning fast. This was the only show in town just a few years ago. And now there's what? There's an organic and an ecological and a regenerative and a agrarian or whatever conference every 15 minutes somewhere. So the interest goes going through the roof really, really fast. So it's in our best interest, if we're going to do eco farming, eco, of course, comes from ecology, ecological farming. Well, it also has to be economic. We have to pay our bills and do ecological farming. So this was foundational to me, but what was really cool about it is I realized that, oh wow, he's got a great understanding of like soils and how soils work and stuff like that. He really didn't have a full picture of ecology. That was like my thing. After two uncomfortable tries at two different universities doing two different courses of study that I really failed to thrive in, I went back to school at Unity College in Maine to study ecology, and all of a sudden it was like, wow. I was telling this guy over here that I don't think I'm Asperger's, but I'm probably pretty close. I'm usually a really secluded, quiet kind of guy, awkward, I can't do small talk, but you get me on topic and I don't shut up. So when I went to Unity College and started studying about nature itself, wow, the world opened to me. So what we're going to talk about today is these principles here that will take us through a full timeline of ecological principles so we can have this ecological model that our farm will fit into. Because if we don't follow the rules of life on this planet, we lose. Nature bats last, and right now it's the bottom of the ninth. And if we don't turn it around in a hurry, it's pretty ugly. So it was in 1993 when, long story, moved from Alaska, where I was previously living, to buy a piece of property surrounded by this as far as the eye can see. And I can tell you right now as a fact, we don't have to theorize about this, we don't have to research this anymore. We know, and we've proven over and over again now on multiple continents around the world, we can turn this into something like this in 15 short years at a profit while feeding ourselves. Now, What a profit means is a +1 at the end of the year. This is not the big sexy presentation where I tell you, yeah, we're crushing it, making $65 million on a quarter acre for postage stamps. Like, no, this is farming. As long as we have a plus at the end of the year, we're doing good. And any surplus that we have goes right back into the system and helps it to regenerate. How do we do this? Do we go to the universities and set up a chestnut orchard exactly like they tell us to, so that 4 years down the line we're $140,000 per acre in the hole before we ever harvested a chestnut? Should we listen to that advice? Oh yeah, but 18 or 20 years out, it's a great profitable business. Not necessarily. Let's use all of the research that's being done at these big ag universities and look for the facts that are in there and then apply them in a natural, ecologically planned system. We can do that by imitating nature. How many of you guys have ever had a garden or a farm field? Good. How many of you have ever had weeds show up? How many of you have ever pulled weeds or tilled weeds or burned weeds or whatever? How many of you have ever won and there's no more weeds ever again? Guess what? The forces of nature are so powerful, they are undefeatable. When we do whatever it is that we do as a human species, as a human race, let's walk out of this building and abandon it for a while. You know what's going to happen? Nature takes over. So why are we fighting against it? Why not insert ourselves into that stream and go in the same direction that it's going in? Then all of these forces that we were formerly fighting are now helping us. They're actually driving our system forward. So these are kind of key concepts right here. This is like the step-by-step protocol. I'll flip through them all, so when the screen is full, take a picture of it. I'll pause momentarily. Identify your biome and your dominant plant community types. What were the historic plant communities in your area before Europeans got here? What were the historic plant communities before people got here? What's growing in the ditches and in the spare places here on the side of the road and the wild natural reserves near you? Those things are surviving with sheer total utter neglect. The stuff in the ditch on the side of the road actually manages to survive salt from the highways around here. It manages to survive mowing every so often. Sometimes they use a wet blade that has herbicide in it, and what happens to it? It keeps coming back. That is a sustainable ecological model. If we can try to kill it year after year after year after year and it won't die, I want to farm that way. Don't be herbiciding my farm year after year after year in order to kill it, but it'll still survive that. Now we have to do a little bit of rehydration, construct some earthworks to help manage our rainfall. We want to harvest rainfall. We want to manage stormwater runoff. There are just about everywhere around the world that you have agricultural land, the soil hydrology is all messed up from 100 years of bad farming. What we need to do is when the rain comes, sometimes we will get more rain than can soak in at the time. We want to move it to where we want to have it. We can spread it to soak it where we want to soak it. We can store it in ponds and tanks, et cetera, et cetera. Managing for water and water use is key. That's what this book is all about right here. So, what's interesting about that book is that book and its companion, which will be out later this spring, the technical manual, total of about 400 pages. That represents 10 pages in my first book, Restoration Agriculture. Then we're going to establish perennial polycultures. Nature rarely forms monocultures. It has these big, huge mixes and messes. And what's fabulous about it, a lot of permaculturists are like, oh, we have to figure out what plants work with what other plants, and we have to design guilds that support one another. It's like, no, we don't. No, we don't. Nature's had this thing figured out for 6,000 years or a zillion years, depending on what reference books you're reading. Nature's got it all figured out. It was designed perfectly. Everything works great. This over that, over that, over that, this climbing all over the whole mess. So we're going to plant polycultures. We're going to do it in a way that we can actually plant it easily, maintain it easily, and harvest it easily. That's where the design comes in. Well, now what we're going to do is we're now going to adapt ourselves to the pattern that shows up in the landscape, because if we don't adapt to nature's rules, we lose once again. So all of the patterns that you see here, those are still rows. I can still use tractors. I can still mow between things. That's designed around equipment use. Even if you're using horses or hand tools, you design it around your equipment use. That also moves the water. Your fences now follow this pattern. Your roads follow that pattern, et cetera. Then your life gets so much easier. Then you manage forever, and the way to do this is not by necessarily listening to all the directions in the silver, stainless steel university horticulture books, but by imitating what those plants have survived with forever. Imitate their natural disturbance pattern. So if you want to take a picture of that one's a good summary right there. Or go get the book Restoration Agriculture. All right, and more cameras go down. And if I'm not talking as fast as Gary Zimmer, somebody tell me to speed up. They usually put me side by side with him because no one can talk louder than him. And the faster, I yield to Gary. He's fast. Restoration agriculture out on the table. This is basically the outline of what we're going to be doing right here today. If I knew it was going to get 3 literary awards, I would have done a better job. I just, it's easy read. It's an easy read. You can read it on the toilet. I only write with a 6th grade reading level because that's all I understand. And then this one is just released right now. And after this session right here, I'll be outside the door to sign copies of either books. So, ecological succession. I talked a little bit about that. Your weeds in the garden are the first step of you observing succession. Your place is trying to reclothe itself with vegetation, and it's not necessarily interested in reclothing itself with the vegetation that you put there, corn, for example. It wants to revegetate itself with the stuff that belongs there. And so part of what we want to do is now imitate this process because a real magical thing happens. Like I said, it's now working on our behalf, and we're working in the same direction as it is, and it's actually what creates the soil. There's so much emphasis on the soil, build the soil, blah, 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 blah. Plant communities build the soil. They make the soil out of air and water and the minerals that they dissolve. Ever seen trees growing out of cliffs? Who dug the $40 hole for that $10 tree? Who did all the cover crops and the mulch and the blah, blah, blah? These plant communities create the soil. Starts with lichens, then their bodies eventually decay and makes enough little bit of crumbs for the mosses to get established. If you went in here and you grab this tuft of grass and you pull it up, what's clinging to the roots of the grass? You're going to have soil and soil life all over the place. Where the heck did that soil come from? Where did it come from? They made it. The process can start with a bare piece of planet. I'm still looking for someone to give me an island in the middle of Lake Superior, 10 acres. I'll show you how to farm it using these techniques. From the lichens, you'll go to like annual grasses, small plants, that sort of thing. Then it'll start to get brushier, more thorny things. Then you have sun-loving trees, shrubs, bushes, and vines, and eventually shade-tolerant bushes and vines. So this is a full crop rotation, which in, put middle Minnesota, that may take 600 years to get there. If you're a grazer, you're familiar with the fact that if you go ahead and you graze your grass, you can graze it right down to the ground, and that's not overgrazing. What's overgrazing is if you don't let it recover back to what it was before. So if we're going to live in northern Minnesota or Kentucky or Tennessee, wherever you're from, there's a particular successional pathway that lasts a certain period of time, and until we get full, complete ecosystem recovery, we've overused that. So all of a sudden what happens is a disturbance comes along. Fire, wind, animal impact, etc., and it resets it. It goes back in successional time. And sometimes I may be saying things like, yeah, set it back. Well, that's not really degrading it. It's just setting it back to an earlier stage, and then it redevelops and it continues forward. Our agriculture currently right now is stuck in this phase. It's stuck in a highly disturbed phase, and when you're in this disturbed phase, this is right in here, this is a phase of degradation. Nutrients leach into the soil like crazy. Carbon evaporates and oxidizes straight from the soil and off gases. Whereas this phase here is the aggradation phase. It creates the soil gets richer, thicker, more nutrient dense. The species that are associated with it are far more diverse. This process of natural succession is so powerful, and it's worked over and over and over again. We've got evidence in it in our mythology. I'm going to tell a mythical story here, and by mythical, it means that there's things in there that we can find meaning from. A myth sometimes can be true. It has truths in it. A myth sometimes even has facts in it. It can use metaphorical languages, and it can use allegorical language. So I'm going to tell a little mythical story here. Once upon a time, there was lots of these big lizard people that walked all over the planet, and out of the sky, this big rock goes whoosh, hits this piece of the ocean and goes kaboom, and an 8,000 degree wall of heat goes around the planet and incinerates absolutely everything. It changed the pH in the oceans, the atmosphere. Everything's burned to a crisp. Carbon goes way out of whack. I forget how many thousand parts per million the atmosphere was immediately after that. And everything got coated with a covering of dust, 3 to 6 inches deep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened next? We got all of this out of that. So there's something powerful about these natural plant community types that's undefeatable. Well, that's a mythical story. It's cute. It's got some meaning in it. It may be true, may be factual, blah, blah, blah. But there's something that I got to observe as a kid when I was in high school. There was this mountain. It was a volcano in Washington State, Mount St. Helens. I got to experience the same thing a couple other times when I lived in Alaska. But all of a sudden, over a period of a couple of weeks, kablooey, this mountain just blew the heck up. I still find it fascinating that these things just go poof and explode. A mountain explodes. And they say volcanic ash, but it's not ash. It's like gravel and rocks and sand. So that everything got coated with this amazing covering of ash. A third of the mountain was blown away. I forget how many zillions of cubic meters of material got spread all over the place. And scientists are like, oh, wow, this would be great. A great study on ecological succession. It's probably going to take, years and years before life comes back. Within 3 or 4 years, the green starts coming back. There were little pockets of what are called ecological refugia, where somehow, for some reason, these plants and these animals survived. I see us ecological farmers as the ecological refugia of the current zombie apocalypse. We absolutely have to have these little refugia all over the place with a wide diversity of stuff going on, because when the cow manure hits the barn fan, we want to have something that'll come back. And within 5 years, beautiful wildflowers all over the place, and they noticed something. Wow, the soil is actually becoming more fertile. I thought it was fascinating when David talked about, the zinc levels in the soil went off the charts because there wasn't even any zinc there. Where the heck did it come from? The plant and the animal communities brought it somewhere from outer space, from the atmosphere, a lot of it too. Rain, we'll talk about that. 5 years later, 15 years later. So now, what if I said, I'm going to grow something, and you set this back and you plow it up? What wants to come back? This. So you brush hog everything and you set it back and you plant your crops. What wants to come back? This. Well, then you herbicide and you go plant your crop. What comes back? This. What comes back? This. What comes back? This. Why aren't we growing this? That's the whole point. 35 years later, is that or is that not amazingly beautiful? And is that or is that not the most amazingly powerful tool that we possibly have? One of the things about an ecologist is we're going to think in wholes, W-H-O-L-E, because we don't think in wholes. Our whole with a W operation, farming operation, ranching operation will be full of holes, H. And when you got holes in the bottom of a boat, it leaks. And so we're going to have money leaking away. We're going to have nutrients leaking away. We're going to have life and vitality and happiness leaking away unless we start thinking about holes, ecological holes. So let's go back to soil again. How did nature build all that soil? How did it make more fertile soil? It's not by the little reductionist bits and pieces. Now, we have a trade show floor out here that has all kinds of really groovy things. And all of those things have the appropriate place, the appropriate context, and they all work incredibly well when they're properly applied and for the right circumstances, for the right reasons. If you're thinking about dead leaves and other plant matter that gets deposited on the surface, this is how nature does it. It grows it right in place, deposits it on the surface. We're talking compost, we're talking mulch, ramial wood chips, that sort of stuff. That all works. It does. Well, now we're talking these critters, these decomposer organisms. They use the carbon in that organic matter to help dissolve the minerals in the soil. So all of the bugs, the effective microorganisms, the Elaine Ingham stuff, all your compost teas, improving your critters and stuff, that works. That's a piece of the pie. My classic, I like Gary Zimmer, he lives down the road from me, Midwest Buy a Bag. You fix your minerals, you get the minerals all set, minerals. It's all about minerals. Well, I almost said Gary right there, I channeled him. It's all about the minerals. So then you have water and air. One of the things that was really interesting, a number of years ago, Jerry Brunetti was the one who tracked it in the Northeast. There used to be a period of time that there was adequate sulfur in the soil, so you had good protein, good growing of alfalfa and all that kind of stuff. Well, then after they put scrubbers on the coal-fired power plants, they started to have to add sulfur in the mineral amendments in the Northeast. We get stuff that comes out of the sky. It's in the rain, it's in the wind, it blows in. So the solubles and stuff that are coming to our property, that's part of the equation as well. We have animals pooping and peeing. That's part of the soil building equation as well. Then we have plants themselves. Their roots are sloughing, they're making the leaves, they're exuding their little exudates, their sugars and all that kind of stuff. No one piece of this puzzle builds the soil. All of them working together in a system is what creates the soil and builds the soil. So know what you're working with, and I'm going to pick on my biochar friends right now. It is not the answer to everything. Let's put organic matter for that matter. Here's a friend from Alaska, okay? If we want to do regenerative agriculture, we increase the organic matter in our soil. Not if you have property that's peat, or if it's a drained lake bottom and it's muck like half of Michigan. You're already at 80–90% carbon, you need more minerals. So now you put more minerals in it, oh, your carbon goes down. You're not regenerative. But now I actually can grow better crops, more crops, and take more carbon out of the atmosphere faster. So we got to be a little bit careful about this simplistic thinking and thinking holes with a W. And this is how nature does it right here. This space between the bedrock and these tree roots was created by this system living for zillions and zillions and zillions of years. All the decomposition helps to dissolve the rock into smaller and smaller particles. The soil also off-gasses the carbon, which goes through the stomata in your leaves, and now your plants grow faster that way. This right here, this is the magic of soil creation. All these roots, all the life that's dissolving the solid rock using water and atmosphere to do it. We can go ahead and we can add compost. We can build soil this way. When I started in Wisconsin, I didn't have the money to buy the equipment that would do that, didn't have the money to buy the feedstock, didn't have the feedstock to make that kind of stuff, so it was not appropriate in my context to do that. Did have a family chicken coop, so I designed it so it's on a slope, and the rabbit hutch, all the manure goes down here, the bat manure goes down here, the chickens all scratch it downhill into a pit, and they do all the compost turning for me. There you go, I've got this beautiful compost. I did a lot less work because I didn't stack the stuff up, turn it over, and, measure the temperature and all that. I just kind of like let the chickens shred it all to pieces. When the compost pile was pretty mature, all of a sudden you come out in the morning, the chickens come up out of tunnels in the compost. What are they doing? What are chickens doing underground in a compost pile? They're eating worms. And so they were actually getting extra feed while making my compost, mixing it and churning it thoroughly. It's perfect. Well, this is more of the extent that I was talking about. I'm doing this on 110 acres. I can't make compost enough to build that soil. So can we actually build the soil using cover crops, minimal tillage, long rotations, complex rotations? And the answer is yes. In my annual crop fields where I have grown annual plants, I've grown everything from beans and corn to squash and cucumbers and that sort of thing. We've turned red clay topsoil into a black topsoil in 15 years, and we were at a net profit every single year along the way. So we can do that. It's still a sticky, thick clay soil, but it's black. Would you rather farm in that or that? That's out in the ag fields. Well, then you notice back here, there's these rows of trees scattered throughout everything. What do you think is under the trees? Look at that. Whew, wait a minute. How did you get, yeah, we got this. And you can take your hand and like tunnel it down like this underneath some of the trees halfway up to your elbow in 15 years. How do we do that? By imitating the natural plant community types of our area. If you live in Alaska, don't plant peaches. If you live in the Central Valley of California, don't plant peaches. Oh wait, they are planting peaches there. Just think about the extent of what humankind is going through to attempt to grow stuff that doesn't belong there in California. All the different water wars between states diverting massive rivers and all that kind of stuff. Now you get to fight, the developers fight against the farmers, fight against the whatever. Plant something that looks like this, but plant the food plants that you can harvest. This is in Croatia, where high calcium water comes up out of the ground through a different kind of limestone, and it precipitates out and makes all these terraces. There are some species that only exist in those pools. It's so calcium rich and so alkaline. So wherever you live, pick species that will grow there. And I'm assuming that most of us, I know some aren't, most of us are from North America here, so I'm going to pick some plant community types that are around. Now remember, these plant communities are not the be-all, end-all, they're not a fixed, static thing. They're part of a long, repetitive series of cycles that go around and around and around and around. They develop through certain phases, and disturbance sets them back to an earlier phase. We'll start with one of the more diverse, and I think it's the most productive because it has a lot of opportunities for human things. What I want you to do here is when you see any annual plants that we have to destroy an ecosystem to till the soil to plant those crops, if you see any annual plants in here, you let me know and we'll erase it. Overstory of the fagaces, oak, chestnut, or beech. What do they all produce? Some kind of large nut. Chestnut produces regularly year after year. Oak and beech haven't had as much breeding yet, and they have episodic, big years and light years. Humans can eat all of those. You have to treat the oak so it doesn't taste as bitter. One creature that I know of that will eat those and not care whether it's bitter or not, they're called pigs. Apples is an understory. Hazelnut is a shrub layer. The prunuses have representatives in the overstory, midstory, shrub layer, ground layer. Prunus is an amazingly diverse family. Peaches, cherries, plums, apricots, and so on. Raspberries, blackberries, grapes, currants, gooseberries. Those are all the raspberries. You'll see them like the canes on the outside of the fields kind of invading your field. That's their job. They're moving out into the grass. Currants and gooseberries are growing in the shade underneath. They don't need the sunlight that other crops need, so they're adapted to being underneath everybody. Fungi, you're producing so much carbon here that somebody's got to decay it, and if you don't put your mushrooms on it, other mushrooms are going to show up on it, which is fine, makes good soil, but we can actually farm the decay cycle as well. Forage, meaning the green plants that we may choose to identify or not identify, and then livestock. Anything in there edible? Is anything there that we can sell to somebody? Is there anything in there that we have to convince people to all of a sudden like something that they've never considered to be food before and push this because it's a specialty market, or is all this mass market easy to sell? All of that is mass market easy to sell. We don't have to change people's behaviors. That's some of the worst stuff to have to change. All we got to do is produce this stuff. Juglandaceae, black walnut. People say, oh, it kills everything underneath it. Well, not if you plant the things that belong with black walnut, such as raspberries, blackberries, elderberries, currants, gooseberries, grapes, fungi, forage, livestock, perennial system, 100% perennial system. Pecans, different crops for different regions. Prunuses, persimmons, pawpaws, raspberries, blackberries, elderberries, currants, gooseberries, grape, passion fruit. You guys starting to get this? Actually, you know what I should do? If you guys are going to be picture taker people, take a picture of that one. All right, we got a couple picture taker peoples. And then you just figure out where you are. And if you go with these, you know what's great about this? This stuff is growing near you right now. It's growing near you right now. And who planted it? Probably nobody. And then the Juglandaceae, the black walnut. I don't like black walnuts, the flavor. Some people do. All right, camera people. The pecan, I love pecans. And then hickory, there's our hickory guy. Back to the cycles and the phases. As these systems develop, what I've mentioned so far, these are all the sun-loving phase. You're coming out of a prairie phase, now it's starting to get all brushy. These are either brushy systems that are beginning to convert to forested systems, but the canopy hasn't closed yet. And so it's still open canopy, you can still get grass growing underneath it. Once you close the canopy, actually, photosynthetic productivity goes down, a lot of the grasses disappear, and then you have a lot less food opportunities for people and our animals. These open canopy systems, savanna systems, between 30 and 60% shade, canopy closure, are the home to the majority of the mammals on this planet. And if we are mammals, this is our home. We belong in these semi-open forested areas. Why do you think people like golf courses so much? That's like, it has this appeal to us, and suburbanites go, ah. Pines, probably the most ubiquitous. We can grow everything from Siberian pine over here to sugar pine over there, Italian pine, pinon pine, and in the central and the northeast, we can go right to Korean pine. which is a 5-needle white pine. Looks just like a white pine. You guys, unless you knew what you were looking at, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between that and a white pine. All right, so those are our plant community types. That's our suite of species that we're going to use to have a perennial ecosystem farm. But now we're going to manage our water. Come this afternoon, that was New Forest Farm before I did all of the terrace and swales and berms and ponds and massive rainfall. Last summer there was a 19.5-inch rain in 4 hours in southern Wisconsin, and on this farm it was the first time in 25 years I had 2 places where there was overland water flow. But 19.5 inches of rain in 4 hours, where did it all go? Well, all over the place. Spread out, soaked in, stored in ponds, et cetera, et cetera. With ponds all through your system, who do you think could benefit from having ponds all over the place? Your birds, your amphibians, your livestock. There's watering points for livestock, there's watering points for irrigation, all designed to be gravity flow, siphoned or channel irrigated. All right, now agroforestry, these are the tricks that get us from where we are today to where we want to be as a perennial system. There's 5 different practices that are described by USDA as agroforestry practices. I'm only going to touch on 2 of them because these are the big 2 for us. Alley cropping. If you're growing crops or if you're growing hay, continue to do what you're doing in those alleys, but take a certain percent out, and between this field and that field, patterned based on how you're going to move your water, put a row of trees in. Or even better yet, put in a row of trees, shrubs, bushes, and vines from your plant community type, and then, oh yeah, but these are tall and these are short. So, the short ones won't interfere with the tall ones because the tall ones will keep growing. And if you're putting them in a narrow row, they get plenty of sun from either side because you're growing corn or beans or vegetables or whatever you are doing on either side. That's not a picture from my farm. So the agricultural crop is our short-term annual income. Grow hemp, it's perfect. And then the longer-term tree crop matures. How many of you currently, right now, are cash flowing and making your money growing chestnuts? Okay, well then, does it really matter if you don't make any money growing chestnuts next year, or 3 years, or 5 years down the line? As long as you don't do all the stupid stuff that they tell you to do that costs all kinds of money. You just put them in the ground, you had the expense of putting the trees in there. Will they grow? Yeah. Will they grow as fast as the ones that the university's taking care of with all the bells and whistles and chemicals? No. Are they going to yield? Yeah. Are they going to yield as much as the university folks, will be able to get out of theirs? No. Do we care? No. No, because we're going to get both yields, both of them. There's a picture in the back of the photo section of Restoration Agriculture of my youngest son, and he's holding 2 green bell peppers. I've grown certified organic produce for 25 years, wholesale, so we're putting pallets on a truck, not just a box at farmer's market. And so I grew an acre of acorn squash, an acre of green bell peppers, an acre of sunflowers, and an acre of chestnuts on the same acre. 4 acres worth of crops in the same 1 acre. I got a half a yield of peppers, half a yield of acorn squash, half a yield of sunflowers, and a half a yield of chestnuts. Add up those yields, what I get? 2 total yields. Duh. Ecologists have known for years and years and years the total site productivity, converting sunlight, rain, and soil nutrients into biomass. Total site productivity is directly related to the number of species that you have, and it doesn't necessarily correlate to association and beneficial relationship between them. It's numbers of species. So the trick comes down to how many species can you handle. I go crazy after about 3 or 4 things above ground, and I can only handle like 2 or 3 types of livestock at any one time because there's just too many bells and whistles. Plus, we want to make sure that whatever we grow, we have enough to market into the marketing channels that we do. So in my case, I had to make sure that I had enough of each particular crop to access wholesale markets to get it on a truck. Otherwise, the truck doesn't want to stop, or it cost me $1 million to get the truck to stop, and that was a waste of time. This was from my farm a long time ago. We're cash flowing, and currently with our small grains, that's just a cover crop. That would be acorn squash probably the following year, while we're growing our rows of trees in between. Don't just grow a single row unless you want to, or a single species in the row. Do multiple species within a row. Put your wildflower blends in the row to have a diversity of flowers that you can harvest for seed or for cut flowers, but it's for the beneficial insects and the butterfly habitat. Oh, gee, I got some, sow thistle on my farm. Oh, I don't really care. The thistle weed guy came by in the early years, and wanted to bust me from the county. And it's like, why? So I got some thistles out. Well, you got to spray them. They're gonna take over the fields next door. I said, wait, time out. Wait. I'm an organic farmer. I don't care that there's a couple of thistles here. If anybody should be afraid of thistles, it would be me, because I don't have all the sprays in the box. This guy over here is farming corn and he's farming beans. They don't have any thistles because they spray all the time. And if you want to bust me for having thistles, 18 thistles on this little acre right here, you go right next door to that guy's CRP patch. He has 40 acres of purple. You get him to stop. And the guy's like, and they left me alone. So your alley cropping, these are the Midwestern hybrid bush hazelnuts with acorn squash in between. So we can still have the efficiencies, everything's linear, it's in rows, we can still maintain stuff with tractors and cultivators and all that while we're waiting for our crops to grow. And now this row of hazelnuts and that row of hazelnuts right there, like 3 or 4 bins worth of hazelnuts just this last year. So chestnuts with our sunflowers in there. Small grains, cereal rye, even though we aren't adapted and evolved, created to eat small grains, I still grow them. My chickens like them, the pigs like them, the cattle stomp them down. Here's the produce that I grow, kale and collards between. Look at the color of the soil. That used to be red when we got started here. And once again, the patterning is designed to spread the water as it falls here, it hits, and it spreads out towards the ridge. So this is alley cropping, growing your crop in the alley with your rows of trees in between. And once again, that's small grains and chestnuts. And you will get, in agroforestry lingo, it's called the land equivalent ratio. If you grow 100% corn, you have 1, because you got 1 crop, 1 yield, and it's a full yield of corn. Well, if you grow 2 different crops, let's say you get 80% of a, I put the wrong finger down first, you get 80% of a corn crop, 80% of a corn crop, then if you get 30 or 40% of a walnut crop, for example, then you have a land equivalent ratio of 1.3 or whatever it is, because you had a little bit less yield of each, but the sum total added up. So my peppers and acorn squash, it was an example. My land equivalent ratio there was 2. I got the equivalent of 2 acres. Trellising grapes on apple trees, for example, that's a land equivalent ratio of 2. I'm getting 2 crops out of the same place. Of course, I'm pruning my grapes so I don't kill my apple trees, and I'm pruning my apple trees so I get sun to my grapes. I got to prune the apples anyways, I got to prune the grapes anyways. I can go prune 2 acres at the same time. So quick question, because we really don't have a lot of time, but go ahead. Yeah, I'll show, well, because what happens to the grain pretty soon? The grain's going to get harvested. So that's another thing, is these do get timed, and you'll have different sequential harvests. And I'll show you a slide later, because remember, everybody, this guy over here was the one who asked, how are you going to harvest it? And I'm going to pick on him when I get to the slide that says how you're going to harvest it, just because he asked. All in fun. All right, cool. Cool. Silvopasture. Is Steve Gabriel here? Is he outside still? Steve has a book on silvopastures. It's actually like the first book written exclusively on silvopasture. Very readable. What I like about Steve and his work is he's actually doing it. The person who's a little bit jaded in me just kind of goes like, yeah, when all these, sorry David, all these academics come up with these really cool books and try to inspire us that haven't really done it. When someone's actually been on the ground and actually has dirt time and they've done it, man, I'm totally into those guys. So, and Steve's one of them. Silvopasture is when you intentionally combine the growing of some sort of tree, shrub, bush, or vine with livestock, grazing livestock. You're not turning your cows out in the woods, because you're not intentionally managing for the forage, you're not managing for the livestock and the trees. You're simultaneously managing for both. And these are pecans with cattle. We've got timing issues when you can't have your livestock in there within 4 months before harvest. Not a problem, you just know that. You got to have a good rotation plan. But as soon as you harvest, bang. That's the key to me. As soon as I harvest, that's where pigs go, because I have all kinds of stuff that I've missed. Quick question. Because they don't want to have any kind of contamination. Why do they take the livestock out prior to human harvest for human consumption? You don't want to have any kind of potential contamination. And this is what's bizarre. How many of you guys are certified organic, and your inspector says, oh yeah, if you ever see a bird poop, you have to put survey flags in a 1-foot square around it, and now you can't grow anything there for the next 2 years. Like, come on. Let's bird net the whole Midwest, for crying out loud. Well, when you have birds, and I got lots of birds. When you plant your trees, you can plant them in a row, protect them somehow if that's a concern of yours. How I've protected them against browsing damage from livestock is to move them. Move them. After the cows are finished chewing their cud and they start standing up, they're bored, they're going to check things out, they'll go eat your trees. They'll only nibble on your trees, and so you watch and let them nibble on your trees because now they're pruning for you. But as soon as they start to take it down to the root, get them moved before that. So as soon as they're finished chewing their cud and one or two start standing up, good time to move them. Or you put out fence. Barbed wire, electric, your choice. Use tree guards, the tree tubes, 5-foot tree tubes. You can buy those from Forest Ag. One of the things that I would caution you with livestock, especially cattle, especially Jersey steers, which are notorious for having about 1/4 cup of brain. I was going down to lunch. They're sitting down, they're chewing. One stood up, he's standing up over there. It's like, well, after lunch, I'll go move these guys. So after lunch, I come out, and here's this Jersey steer with 2 feet of a 5-foot tree tube sticking out of its mouth, and it's going round, round, round. So I had to step on it and pull it out. It was a horrible scene, green and blood and snot and guts, and the stink was horrible. Bad scene for the animal, bad scene for me. And I said, well, that'll learn you. Well, it didn't learn him, it taught the other ones. And so from then on, tree tubes were food. And they just, oh, that looks fun. Dad had so much fun with those. So just be careful with that. Also, like shredded tires, they like to eat shredded tires. We kind of bred the brains out of those guys. Use a multi-species mob stock system. I've gotten as few as 5 animals to mob. You just put them really tight with a hyperactive electric fence at first, and then something snaps in that little brain, and then they're a herd, and they're shoulder to shoulder. You can like let them loose, and they're all kind of walking together. And then you only have to have a relationship with one. You find out who the dominant is of that gang, you have a relationship with that one, and you move them around. If you guys haven't read it, Alan Nation has a book on stocker cattle profits. When I read that, it's like, oh my gosh, this is revolutionary. I don't want to have to build a barn, can't afford to build a barn. Don't want to have haying equipment. I don't want to have, hay that gets rained on, et cetera, et cetera. I want to buy cattle in the spring, sell cattle in the fall, because in Wisconsin it turns green in the summer, and I'll just bank on the free grass. And if I buy a 500-pound steer in the spring and I sell them at 800 pounds, I get a net gain of 300 pounds times the amount of dollars per pound that thing sold for at the sale barn. Sale barn to sale barn, my neighbor John picks them up in a trailer, no infrastructure, I make money. And I put a beef in the freezer. Why on earth would I want to buy a $15,000 bull to do this, that, and the other thing? If that's what you want to do, that's your thing. But that's not what I did. So I really recommend that book. And then go mob them. You can mob them. You put a mob of 10. What you can do with 10 steers is amazing. Stocker Cattle Profits or whatever that is. Whoever knows what it is. Go look on the book table. It's on that side over there. How much money have I been making off of walnuts in the years that I've been doing that? None. But if I'm making $300 per animal and I got 10 animals, that's 3,000. Well, if I put one in the freezer, not only do I put like $6 a pound grass-fed ground beef in the freezer, I'm putting $30 a pound T-bones in there. So I'm eating for free, and I'm still making a profit on that. And they're actually the ones that are managing my system. They're the weed control, they're the pest control, disease control, they're the fertilizer, and they're happy. They're in the shade. Or I can do the old style, let's plant all these trees and wait for 40 years. I've reforested my land. I'm doing good. And then you're going broke in the meantime and you're not eating. My favorite, of course, my buddies, is the Pigses. There's this guy in the cowboy hat was visiting my farm once. Here he is over there. And he comes up and he says, well, where's your fence? I said, well, that right there. He says, well, that's not a fence, that's a suggestion. It's like, so I put these suggestions around it, and what's interesting, last summer when I had that 19-inch rain, it washed out a section of fence, and I was so busy trying to, panic and put other things back together again. I just never got around to checking the fence to see if it was, still there or not. And when I finally loaded them in October, put them on the trailer, then I'm going around, I'm pulling up fence for the winter, a third of the fence was gone. And the pigs never left. Why? Because this is the best dang pig habitat there is. What are they going to do, escape and go out into a cornfield or a bean field? It's like, no, hey, man, this is great. We got, they first start eating currants in the spring, raspberries, mulberries from middle of June all the way till September. Then cherries and apples, early apples and hazelnuts, then hickories, then oaks, and they finish on chestnuts. They're happy pigs. They're nice and big and fat. And I used to be a vegetarian, I really was, for about 4 years or so, and now I can hear the sound of the fat on that pork chop as I cut it and just so those, good stuff. And I got Joel Salatin's book there, Pasture, Profits, Poultry, or whatever it was, and you know, man, you can get a 20% feed reduction. 10 minutes. Oh, sorry. You can get a 20% feed reduction if you put them in these mobile cages. Cool. And then you have an 8,000% increase in labor. So I got into free-range chickens. You turn them loose. After a while, if you get enough brushy cover out there, they get smart. Those are not tame little barnyard chickens. They are mean little evil stink-eyed chickens, and they know how to do it. You give me 5 minutes now? Pardon? Predators are only a problem for the stupid chickens. Only problem for the stupid chickens. And so then you end up with a system that looks something like this, that here I'm still growing walnut trees, that someday those will be great full-size walnut trees. Turkeys are not stupid either. They're a lot smarter than I thought. We grow a lot more of the heritage breeds when we do the turkeys. Now in chestnut season, you find them under the chestnut trees. When the mulberries are on the trees, their noses are purple, their butts are purple, and in chestnut season, they're out in the chestnut trees. Canopy architecture is critical, because if we're going to be taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil or wherever else we want to put it, if you grow a 2-foot-tall crop of soybeans on an acre, that's all you got for a solar panel, man. My solar panel goes from 30, 40, 50 feet in the air all the way down, all the way underneath, and I still have my 2-foot-tall crop of soybeans in the middle. You want to catch carbon, take it out of the air? Use a bigger lung. Go into the third dimension. This has way more carbon in it, more total site productivity than something like this. Where can you graze your cows? Where's your cash flow? You're just sitting there and waiting. How much carbon can you really take out of the atmosphere? Yes, you can increase the carbon in the soil, but we can do it tenfold faster when we now start putting in our three-dimensional structures spaced around our equipment and our water management techniques. So we manage the water, we can still use our equipment, we can still get our cash crops, and we get all the benefits of the perennial polyculture system that's in there. Does that look like an orchard to you? No, but it's just as productive as an orchard, because I've got grass. Then they start to get too close. When the grass starts to disappear, uh-oh, I've had too much canopy closure. People say, well, you shouldn't plant things so close together. It's like, well, why not? Because now I've got yields. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to cut firewood, I'm going to cut mushroom logs, and before I chip it with my flail chopper, there's my flail chopper right there, I scatter this stuff around, wine cap stropharia, edible mushrooms, and that's what it looks like right after you chip it. I've just spread stropharia mushroom spawn over 5, 10, 15, 20 acres, conveniently on freshly cut biomass that they want to decompose, and poof, everywhere. I got naturalized populations of stropharia to beat the band. This little patch right there was a $600 patch of wild mushrooms. They're not wild, I know exactly where they were because I put them there. And they're delicious. And then what do I do with that extra wood in the front of the bucket? How about these things? And if you can't sell those, don't worry about it. Eat them. Don't eat more than 2 meals of shiitake a day, because they are actually an accelerant, and you will accelerate. The pigs don't seem to care. Inoculate your stumps. Oyster mushrooms. I got oyster mushrooms all over the place. All these different mushrooms are now growing on the biomass that I put there in the first place. We don't have to do all these different things as separate enterprises. We do them as a complete, complex whole. And they turn the kids loose and they have a blast. Some of my favorite things about doing this and why I do it, and I'm going to skip forward, is this right here, is these guys that show up. This is in a former cornfield. I'm going to flip forward, successional time. Boom, look at it change, look at it grow. Who says you won't get yields this way? Now, how many calories in a fossil fuel per calorie of corn? Go on the internet, I forgot what it was that I looked up. About 10 calories of eco-literacy, of fossil fuel per calorie of corn. So that means there are 100 calories of fossil fuel per calorie of corn-fed beef. That's really stupid. That's really, really stupid. Where's your nutrition coming from if plant fertility is coming from chemical NPK? And it's not from the decay of this organic matter and the chemical dissolution of the parent material bedrock. Where's your nutrition coming from? Well, as we saw with like Zach Bush's talk, you ain't got it. You don't have none. One of the biggest deficiencies in the grain and legumes-based diet, and we pass that deficiency on to our animals if we're eating meat, are the methylated folates, these B vitamins. And it's the causes of cancer, heart disease, lung disease, obesity, diabetes. Spina bifida even is caused by a specific methylfolated methyl deficiency. And we can't get that from our grains and legumes. We have to get it from the terrestrial ecosystem diet and lots of green plants. So where is your nutrition coming from? If you're just getting highly processed, glyphosate-contaminated, GMO, non-nutritive, indigestible carbohydrate filler with BHA and BHT to preserve freshness, you're getting it from here. Every time that the human race has gone to the annual plants as their staple foods, it's resulted in this. David just talked about it. 29, 30 different examples around the world. It results in this. It results in this. That's in Syria, by the way. So then, of course, we're told, well, we got to shift to that plant-based diet. And I don't disagree, but with qualifiers. If we were to shift to this kind of plant-based diet instead of that kind of animal-based diet, that is ecological suicide. That is so stupid. I don't care if it's organic. This is a healthier planet than that. This has a better carbon footprint than that. Well, this has a better carbon footprint than either of those. Now let's turn the bison loose in that, or the cows, because we start getting all of our buddies start to show up. A loggerhead shrike, almost endangered species. It's a non-hawk type bird that eats mice and grasshoppers nonstop, and when it's not hungry, it keeps hunting, and it stabs them on spines. And you see little Vigo the Impaler putting mice all over the barbed wire fence. Really pretty cool. One of the highest mortality rates of any reptile out there are like 1 out of 3,000 snapping turtles will grow to an adult. How did I get a snapping turtle 1.5 miles from the nearest water? No idea. No idea. I got this guy. I got amphibians up the wazoo. 7 different types of amphibians. This guy, obviously, his eyes are bigger than his stomach because he's trying to eat that thing. You know what that is? That's the caterpillar for a polyphemus moth, the second largest moth in North America. Also have Cecropia moths, which are the largest moth in North America, the size of a dinner plate. And when you're walking along at night and they fly into you, it's a trip. 3 different kinds of weasels. Where did these guys come from? This is one of the rarest fungi in North America. Showed up. I just took a picture of it and then tried to identify it afterwards. Like, whoa, how did that happen? By farming intensively, what David was talking about. How did I get an endangered species northern cricket frog on the farm? By farming intensively, following nature's pattern. Build it and they'll come. They need a place to go. Northern shrike, this is a wood turtle. This just happened in October. It was really funny. It's like, I haven't seen that kind of snake before. It's this little guy like this big. And then it was cold, so it's on the concrete. And then I go up to it and it goes, and it's going, it's like, oh, isn't that cute? He's pretending to be a rattlesnake. And so I take a picture of him, and then I did this picture right here, and he had that big wide jaw, and he did act like a rattlesnake, but I know it's not a rattlesnake, so I flip him off into the bushes, and I look it up, and that's a Masaga rattlesnake. What do you know? Where do they come from? It doesn't matter. They're at one of the most ecologically diverse, happy places for these creatures to be, and I get my yields. Now, this is where we do the embarrassing question time. It's like, okay, it's grape season, time to harvest grapes. These are grapes. Go pick the grapes. These are not grapes. Don't pick them. Got it? These are hazelnuts. We already picked them. And this is the alley of grass over here. The cows get that. And then the pigs get it. Pigs come in and clean up later afterwards. And we can put our livestock right out in there. This is out in an apple orchard. Am I going to leave it there until they kill the plants? No. Am I going to get yields? Yes. Am I going to eat well? Oh, doggone yes, I eat well. I eat really, really well. It's being so wet this summer, I eat a lot of mushrooms. All right, just a quick note before I wrap it up here. Ecological definition of regeneration goes back some 400 years into Germany. And regeneration is the ability for a cell, tissue, or organism or an ecosystem to recover from damage and to grow and expand its population. It replaces itself, it comes back, and it expands its population. That's a 400-year definition of regeneration. That's the one that I stand by. In that process, yes, we may regenerate some soils here and there. I agree that that's kind of nice. It's not exactly a whole systems thinking if we're in peat or if we're in muck. But this actually, when I took this picture, this was the #1 hit for regenerative farms on, you do a Google search for it. Okay, now, within 6 months of that picture, that this picture was taken, that happened. Let me ask you a question. How much of that regenerated? Okay? How much of that regenerated? None of it. None of it. That is not a regenerative system. Yes, they built carbon in their soil. That's really cool. I love it. How much of that is a regenerative system? It's going to take bulldozers and nuclear weapons to undo the ecological restoration and the good that has been done this way. And we are going to experience increasing yields and fertility with decreasing costs for millennia. For millennia. We can walk away and it only gets better. One of my role models on the planet is this gal right here. And look at the size of the spread of her branches and these people. This is like the center of town square. This is, I think it's number 34 on the top 100 oldest organisms on the face of the planet. Her name is El Castagno de Centocavalli. She's in San Alfio, Sicily, up on the side of Mount Etna, the most seismically active place on the planet. It blows up and burns, periodically every 30, 40, 50 years. There's an earthquake or 10 every single day. She's almost 4,000 years old. Been producing chestnuts for probably 3,997 of those 4,000 years. One of my definitions of sustainable is sustainable agriculture. If you have to plant your crops again next year, that's not very sustainable. 4,000 years of productivity growing in the rock on the side of a volcano, getting burnt and earthquaked over and over and over and over and over again, that's sustainable. What are the companion species around it? Apples, cherries, hazelnuts, livestock. It's been going for 4,000 years, and this is a human civilization that's been built around that and has been there ever since. So, what I would encourage us all to do, go back home, look at what are the natural plant community types of your area. We can buy land like this, cheap, using the techniques I just showed you. We can now plan, plant, and manage and harvest from our farm. And so 15 to 25 years later, it'll look like this, but it'll all be food. All be food. We can do it at a profit. And if one person and one family can take 110 acres and at a profit, revegetate it and turn it green with all these endangered wildlife forms coexisting with us, if one person could do it in 15 years, what happens if we all do it? We can revegetate this whole entire planet, turn this ship around in 15 years at a profit, but we can't do it sitting on our ass. So we're going to have to get up, put roots in the ground, and let's walk in the same direction as natural succession and turn this place green. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to the Acres U.S.A. podcast, a podcast production of Acres U.S.A. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres U.S.A. is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Kennedy Stroessel and Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experience.